Game over, man. Game over.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. So serious.
I am Iron Man. This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for February 3rd, 2025, and I'm Jaden Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, for this conversation where we talk about the day that I first met Brendan and then the day that I killed him. It's going to be an exciting episode.
I was about to say I'm your most trusted companion, but I guess not.
Plot twist. It's a plot twist. Which
appropriate for this show.
Yeah, I was going to say it's full of.
Yeah. Very appropriate.
We're here to talk about the new film Companion, which is a film that I honestly didn't really know too much about going into it, other than I had seen one of the trailers. And we're going to talk about that briefly here before we get into the conversation. However, it's one of those years so far where, despite where we land on Companion, and we'll talk about how it, at least of the few 2025 films that we've seen so far, it's not my favorite. Spoiler alert. However, I think there's some interesting things about it, and 2025 has jump-started in this really intriguing way. And while this film doesn't necessarily continue the trend of the quality of January, I do think, at least for me, it does continue at least to have some intrigue. So 2025, I do hope, and perhaps some of this comes off the heels of the end of 2024 and the Oscar season and everything that we've been talking about on the main show, that it just feels like such a disaster right now.
At this point now, anything in the theater is probably going to surprise us, right?
I think that's it. Yeah, I think there's some surprising qualities. That's ultimately what I was building to.
You are right that there is this, I guess, lingering sort of assumption people have about January movies, right? I feel like if we were to go to the movies in January this year, the most common depiction of a January movie would be something like Flight Risk, which we haven't reviewed on this show. I assume that would probably be the closest proximity of a quote-unquote January movie. But the majority of films that we're getting in January that you and I have chosen to talk about here, they're more interesting. They're at least trying to be movies, right? And that's kind of cool. That's kind of cool to see that.
Yeah, and I do wonder, and this is perhaps a conversation to have on the main show at some point, but I do think that we are going to see an evolution of the January, February, March film over the next few years, and especially over the next decade, because there are so many production companies now, indie films or indie production companies that are producing films that in a given year, we're getting upwards of 100 to 150 more films than we did 20 years ago.
Yeah. And many of them, as they're starting to become profitable for their respective sizes, are putting out bigger films for themselves, right? I mean, we saw that last year with A24 pushing a movie like Civil War, which was not a quote-unquote big movie in the realm of like a Deadpool and Wolverine as far as its budget is concerned.
But for A24,
I think we're going to be seeing a lot more medium-sized budgeted big movies. And I think that's a really interesting thing.
Yeah, and I think that's why January and February and March might see more quality, because there's just so many films coming out in a given year, and they have to come out sometime. They might not be a summer movie, especially from Warner Brothers' perspective, and they did distribute this. But to my point earlier, they did not produce this film, right? It came from New Line Cinema and Vertigo, and maybe those are subsidiaries of Warner Brothers. I don't know, but the point is that a lot of these kinds of movies are coming from these smaller production companies, whether they're subsidiaries of the big ones or independent studios. And often, I mean, you know this, but for people listening that don't know, a lot of these independent studios will make these, and then the big studios will buy them up and distribute them.
Yeah.
So however they are born, we're getting more and more of them, and they need spaces to release these movies. And January and February are becoming these gold mines of needing space to
the room is there. The room is there.
The room is there, and so we're getting better quality, which I do think is exciting.
In a couple of years from now, if that continues to ramp up, will we even have quote unquote movie seasons anymore?
I think so. I think so. I think
Okay.
the difference will be the quality, like the bar is going to raise,
Or
like
at
the
least like
floor is
the
going to
size, the sizability of some of these
that
movies.
the
will probably change,
sizability and the floor as far as quality is concerned. I think that's going to raise as well.
Yeah, because we
so,
know,
like-
James Cameron is never going to release an Avatar movie in March or
No,
August,
no,
right?
no.
Yeah.
No. I think we'll still have, perhaps call it vibes or tone. These kinds of movies, these pulpy thrillers like this, or A Den of Thieves. You might get those kind of movies in January and February, but the quality of them are starting to raise a little bit. And then you're going to have your typical summer fare, where you're going to have your Jurassic Parks and your Fantastic Fours.
We'll have thoughts about them momentarily.
Yeah.
As in maybe a couple days. We'll certainly have a post Super Bowl movie trailers roundtable at some point.
For sure. Yeah, we'll get to those here in a minute, but you'll have your summer season, and then you get into the fall and you're going to have your awards Oscar season as well. So I do think that you'll have your typical seasons, but I just think because of the plethora of content out there, and obviously not everything's going to be great, but I think generally you're going to start to see quality, kind of rise a little bit.
So are we actually going to get good movies?
I think so.
That's a cool thing for our jobs, isn't it?
It is really neat. And I think also part of it, because making movies is so much more attainable, because it's twofold. One, there's so many of these production companies now, whether they be, again, subsidiaries or independent studios, and they need filmmakers. So you're seeing a lot of up and coming filmmakers given opportunities that under the old system would have been much more challenging and difficult. So that is exciting to see as well.
We're also seeing, we're seeing a lot of those filmmakers who would normally get snatched up by a Marvel or a Disney or something like that. They would continue to make smaller to medium-sized films as opposed to just getting snatched up by the system. So that's, and we're seeing that now with January for sure, right? A lot of the movies we're talking about here with January, they're not small movies, but they're also not your typical summer fare by comparison to the size. And they're filmmakers who are still trying to make their own respective films and maintain their own respective visions, which is cool to see.
I mean, perhaps a good example, depending on where you sit on this film, I guess, but circling back to Companion, this is written and directed by Drew Hancock, and this is his debut film, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, well, there you go. And I don't know the story of how he became attached to this, but again, you're looking at a smaller film. This only had a budget of $10 million, so it's a smaller film. It's coming from New Line Cinema, as I noted earlier. Does a Drew Hancock get, and again, I don't know anything about him. Maybe he is the son of some oligarch. I don't know. But assuming he's, let's just say for the sake of argument, he's a 23-year-old who went to the USC Film School or wherever. He went to Asbury University, where I worked. They have a film school there. If he came out of that school and was looking for a job 30 years ago, that might have been much more difficult unless you went around and made your own clerks. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. And how this movie became I guess no. I don't know the exact story, but from what I understand, this movie is being marketed as from the people who brought you Barbarian, the horror film Barbarian, which, full disclosure, is a horror movie you and I did not really go for.
I did not.
Unlike
love
most
Barbarian.
people. Yeah,
No.
I think I liked it more than you, but a lot of the reservations you had about it, I absolutely share. I don't love that movie. I love aspects of it, but I don't love it in totality.
Yeah.
I believe that film's filmmaker, Zach Krieger, I believe his name is, who was a producer on Companion. He actually eyed Companion as his directorial follow-up to Barbarian. But I guess maybe given Drew Hancock's script, he probably felt that this is something that was more attuned to his own vision and trying to maintain that. And maybe that's how this film came about as Drew Hancock's directorial debut.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah. And yeah, I could see how that kind of formulated there because it absolutely began with his script. And I don't know if he was originally tapped to direct or not, despite however those conversations went,
right.
There's more opportunity out there, I guess, is ultimately the point I was trying to make there. As we transition to Companion, I do think there needs to be a little bit of a discussion about the film's marketing because the trailers for this film reveal an awful lot. If you're listening to this because you're curious about the film and you're trying to judge if this is something that you want to go see or not, I don't say this often, turn this episode off. Go watch the movie and come back. We will not be able to have a proper conversation without revealing certain details about the film. And the way the film treats its reveals, there is a mystery that it is building up to, and then there is a sleight of hand. Yeah. That sleight of hand is revealed as a major centerpiece of the trailers, of the marketing. Right. So if you've seen the trailers, then it's already revealed. It's fine. You can stay. But if you haven't seen any of the marketing, do not watch the trailers at all. Do not read about this movie. Just go see it completely blind. That is the best way to see the film, and that is how the film wants you to see it. There was clearly a disparity between Drew Hancock's intent with the film and the marketing from Warner Brothers.
Yeah. There are more twists in the movie that the trailers don't give away, but there's one central there's one central
big
gimmick.
One,
there's one central thing that this movie does that the trailers do give away. And honestly, the movie works best not even knowing what that thing is.
Yeah. Yes. I do think that will impact how you view this film.
Yeah. And
I guess the early parts of it, for sure.
Well, I guess in full disclosure on that particular subject, you and I went into this movie seeing that trailer, right? Yeah. So we knew what this thing was. And I'll say this now, I would have liked the movie more had I not known about that.
I agree. Yeah. Yeah, because you do see the mechanics of the film working as a mystery early on.
Yeah.
That is strange. It's very, very weird because it's hiding everything that is revealed in the trailer. And so it's a bizarre experience if you've seen the trailer first.
Yeah.
Which, that's not something you typically say, or at least you don't always say that about a film, right. But in this case, there is a weird disparity there.
Yeah.
All right. With that out of the way, we, of course, are going to get into some spoilers here for this conversation. So fair warning, if you haven't seen the film and you don't know what this film is about at all. All right, Companion. It is written and directed by Drew Hancock, as we noted earlier. It stars Sophie Thatcher, Jack Quaid, Lucas Gage, who else? Megan Siri, Rupert Friend has a little role here as well.
Yeah, the Swan himself.
The Swan himself. Absolutely.
Only those who know about Wes Anderson will probably pick up on that joke.
Yes. I think about that performance often still.
Hey, we consider those Rondell shorts as a full feature. That was a Best Supporting Actor nomination there waiting to happen.
So good. At any rate, if you're not familiar with Companion, a billionaire's death sets off a chain of events for Iris and her friends during a weekend trip to his lakeside estate.
Well, at least the plot synopsis understands what to hide from the audience.
Exactly. Whoever wrote the synopsis knew what this film was and did not want to give away the big reveal that we see early on. All right, let's get into it. Or maybe before we get into it, should we just go ahead and talk about the elephant in the room?
Let's go ahead and get out of the way, because I feel like you and I will be sort of feeling like our wings are clipped trying to give our opening thoughts on the movie without revealing the specifics of what the trailer gives away and what that central reveal is up front.
Yes.
So, okay, we're in spoilers. 3, 2, 1. Iris is a robot.
Yes. She is a robot.
Or as they call her at one point, you don't have to bleep me out, JD, an F-bot, we'll simply say. Yep.
That's a lot of the first half of the film.
Yeah.
There is a major reveal. And the film, again, as we were somewhat sliding by earlier, the film in the first 20 minutes or so, it treats it as a mystery.
Yeah.
We don't know that Iris is a robot until there's this eureka moment where, oh my, she's a robot. Like that's how the film treats the reveal. And the trailers go, screw that. We're going to reveal it to you right now.
We're constantly watching this from Iris's perspective, and she doesn't know that she's a robot.
She doesn't know.
Yeah. So it makes no sense for the trailers to give that away. Now there are little tricks in that first third of the movie that you're alluding to that you watch the film again knowing this, you might pick up on the little pieces of foreshadowing that suggest that she's a robot, where she says something along the lines of, oh, like you're emotionally this way. I'm just not built that way, which is a common expression, but it actually means something more in the context of this movie.
And you know it, like you can see the mechanics of the film working within the dialogue and the dynamic between the characters.
Yeah.
Where it's like, this is very obvious what's happening here. And the film is pretending that it's not.
which I will say, given the fact that we may be a little bit underwhelmed by this movie, even though I think we both still like it overall, I will at least give the film some credit. I think some of those sequences are pretty clever. The way that some of those pieces of foreshadowing are written, I think are pretty clever. And I do think they would have felt more clever for sure had we not known this mystery going in. Because then if I at least found myself trying to pick up on them in the moment, and then they became distracting for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, no, I agree. With that context laid out, do you just want to get into your opening thoughts then?
Yeah. And I guess I should clarify, I do like this movie. I just know I would have liked it more had I not known that central twist that the trailers are giving away. So I do find myself feeling kind of underwhelmed by the movie in general. I think Sophie Thatcher is astounding here. I think she's 2 for 2 in giving astounding horror performances in otherwise underwhelming horror movies for me. This one being Companion, the other one being Heretic. And these are 2 movies I still overall really liked, or at least liked to a certain degree. I think each one has their own blemishes. I mean, with Companion, the blemish really being the marketing, so it's not really the film's fault. A movie like Heretic just having a very strong first half and then a very weak back half. But I do think Sophie Thatcher has proven herself to be a really compelling horror presence, and I want to see her in more movies like this. Hopefully, ones that are either better constructed or, in this case, don't give things away ahead of time.
Seriously.
But yeah, it's really hard for me to articulate how well this movie would have worked for me if I was surprised by these things. I feel like I would have liked it more. It's a very tight and efficient film, given the type of film that it's going for. It is being marketed as, no pun intended, a companion of sorts to Barbarian, but it's not like Barbarian at all. It's not as flimsy as that film is. It's not taking the same type of narrative chances as that film was. And I have to give Drew Hancock some credit for keeping things pretty close to the chest with regard to his storytelling and some of his reveals and even some of his thematic context with regard to Companion. It's a movie that's not trying to reinvent any wheels. in its depiction of AI specifically, it doesn't hold a candle to movies like Ex Machina or Her or Lars and the Real Girl even. But I don't think it's necessarily trying to. I think there are some really interesting icky things it gets to at the end that maybe we'll talk about that I don't know if the film is even aware of. But we'll save that for a little bit later. I think it's a fun movie that I would have had a lot more enjoyment in had I just simply been more surprised. And it's sad because I don't think that's the film's fault. And I have a hard time overlooking that.
Yeah, no, it sounds like, shocking as we share the same brain, it sounds like we're in a very similar camp here. I think the film overall is fine. In some ways, there is something refreshing about it in the sense that it's tackling a subject matter that has been very well traversed, going all the way back to Metropolis in 1927.
Yeah.
The human robot AI dynamic has a long, long history in Hollywood. You can also say the same thing about women and how they're often controlled by a misogynistic world, an idea that also has a rich history in film.
Yeah.
However, what's compelling about this film is that it is aware of that history, and it isn't trying to be, to your point, another major entry in the pantheon of elite sci-fi cinema.
Yeah.
It has no desire to be Blade Runner, for example,
Yeah.
or Ex Machina, or Her, or After Yang, or AI, Spielberg's AI, or Chappie. Might be joking about that last one, but I love that one still.
I am liking Chappie more and more with each year. I really am.
Yeah, I am too.
It's an interesting movie.
It is. This is brazenly a fun, satirical, pulpy thriller that leans into its diverting qualities. It's nothing more than that. It does have a thematic underbelly that examines relationship power dynamics and the manipulative abuses of control that we see between Josh and Iris. But I don't know how interested the film really is in those ideas. It's all kind of bubbling just beneath the surface. Mostly, I think the film uses those tropes for its genre thrills, which I did enjoy. I do think there is fun to be had here. Its world building is compelling. I love how the film just flatly calls it for what it is. If we had the ability to create these robots that are so humanistic that they pass as real people, we would absolutely use them as sex toys. 100%. We would use them as, you noted, they're F-bots. That would be the first thing we would use them for. There is a clever awareness to this film regarding robots and AI that I do appreciate in that regard. And again, it's not trying to say anything profound. It's mostly just making observations and using them in a playful way. So maybe it's slight, but I love that it is what it is. It's nothing more than that, nothing less either. And the performances here, I think, are really good at understanding the kind of movie that they're in. And I'm with you. Sophie Thatcher is terrific here. Really good. Maybe too good for the film, to be quite honest.
She's phenomenal. She really is.
She is really great. I do agree.
Yeah. And I do agree with you that the film is, as we both really said, it's not trying to be anything more than what it is, especially when you're going to be comparing it to other movies that have certainly had a more, I guess, sophisticated outlook on its respective topics, whether it be about our relationship with AI or even further, its ideas on toxic masculinity, which is also here in this movie. I kind of appreciate that a movie like this comes around and tries to have a little bit of fun with some of those really serious topics. It doesn't take itself too seriously. I mean, you have Jack Quaid here essentially giving his Scream 2022 performance all over again. And it kind of feels like the movie's weirdly aware of that little meta quality. I don't know if that was intentional, but again, I think as slight and obvious as his character arc is, I think he's very compelling at doing that. I think he's very good at it and very threatening and very fun to watch. The villainry in him, I think, is very well handled. So I appreciate that a film like this is not trying to take itself too seriously in that regard and really just lets us have a little bit of fun with some of these self-serious topics. And I think that's why I still find myself appreciating the film as a whole, because it is very efficient. It is knowingly superficial. It is very easy to compare it to some of these other films that we mentioned, in many ways, this kind of feels like, what if Ava from Ex Machina did join the real world? This could be the sequel to that movie in many ways.
It kind of does play out that way a little bit. Yeah.
Especially given where Alex Garland's film actually does end. This does feel like it could be a very twisted, natural next step in some ways.
Sure.
But it's not trying to get you to think, which I weirdly like about that. And it's credit to Drew Hancock is not just a writer for keeping things efficient. I think his filmmaking's pretty good too. It's not the flashiest. He knows what works. The thing being Sophie Thatcher, and he relies on her to really carry the movie. And a good director knows when to tone things back, play things with a little bit more restraint, if he or she has a great actor, a leading actor specifically, that can do the work for you. And Sophie Thatcher is clearly that talented to do that.
No, I completely agree. It's not a thought-provoking movie by any stretch of the imagination. Our relationship to AI, those tropes here are mostly trivial. It might be overplayed a little bit at the end, but nothing that is overwhelming to the film. Same thing with its ideas on women being entrapped in these relationships. Those are ideas that have been mined in much more vital ways than other movies. That here is, it's not that the film is undermining or underplaying those ideas. It's certainly not overlooking it, but it is using it in a fun, pulpy way.
Right.
And I think that's why Sophie Thatcher's performance is so fantastic to this film, because she does give credence to that idea with Iris, but the film as a whole isn't trying to make some sort of grand observation on it, if that makes sense. I think it plays that down the middle really well. And in terms of the plotting of the film, it's very simple. There are some fun twists and turns along the ways, but it's not overly complicated either. Like, it's a film that, again, it understands what it is. It leans into its tropes. It has a lot of fun. And I did enjoy myself in the moment. Is this going to be a film that I think about 3 months from now? Probably not.
Probably not.
By the end of the year, I will forget that it exists. But during my time in the theater, I did enjoy it.
You mentioned other January movies that we saw this year that you like more than this, and I would agree. I do think Presence and Den of Thieves 2 are better movies than this, for sure. I'll be thinking about those movies for a while, and that's... I think they're better movies on one hand, but they're also compelling us in ways that just stimulate you and I specifically. You and I gravitate to those types of movies and their respective agendas, maybe more so than what Companion's doing. But I will say, with Companion, if there is anything somewhat compelling about it, I think a lot of it really is funneled through Sophie Thatcher's performance, because she does a great job getting you to feel real pity for her, despite knowing that she's also not real. And, given our relationship with AI and the worry that many of us have around it now, that does lend itself to a pretty provocative notion about whether we're even supposed to be sympathizing with this thing, right? I don't know if the film's aware of that. By the end, I mentioned that there is a bit of an icky quality to the end, that it almost kind of feels like AI propaganda in some ways. I don't know if that was intentional or just a provocative accident. At this point, I'm not sure if the film was aware of that. That's kind of where I'm leaning. Yet at the same time, that is probably the one thing that provoked me the most, as far as maybe the film rising above just its superficial thrills. I think there's maybe an interesting conversation to be had about that, given how innocent that Sophie Thatcher plays Iris, and how we just instinctually respond to her and we instantly sympathize with her. Maybe we're like, are we supposed to? Like, it's kind of a weird thing. And I kind of appreciate the film at least having that backbone, if that was its intent.
Yeah, I mean, I think about it in similar ways to Ex Machina in that regard, because the two films end very similarly.
Yeah.
And given how you feel about Ava, I believe is the character's name in Ex Machina.
Alicia Vikander's character.
It's crazy. It's been a decade since that film came out.
Oh, that movie rocks.
It's so good. But you think about the way that character is treated, you similarly empathize with her, and then she makes those decisions at the end as she's trying to escape. Now, with Iris, we see much more overt violence against her than what we see with Ava, where a lot of what she was dealing with was psychological warfare. There is a physical warfare that Iris is up against in this film. But going back to my opening thoughts, I noted that the world building of the film, I do think is really interesting. And I think to speak to that specifically, there is an interesting component to Iris, and as it is revealed later, since we are in spoilers here, the Patrick character as well, played by Lucas Gage, where they are built as these companions, these romantic partners that people buy and manipulate, create for themselves. But the romances from their perspective are wholeheartedly genuine.
Yeah.
And that is the greatness of not just Thatcher, but Lucas Gage as well. I think he's fantastic here. And how they give credence to how they feel about these human beings and the behavior that they display, which is in total contrast to the, let's say, extremely flawed human characters that we see here. And you're right. I think that duality offers perhaps something that is a little thought-provoking given how things play out. And you think about Patrick and his final act here. For a robot character, it is intriguing why he would make that choice as it relates to deep love and the sacrifices that you make for that love. But at the same time, the film isn't really taking those ideas too seriously. Ex Machina is a film that, for all of its diverting qualities, and that is a really fun film in a lot of ways as well, it very much is a thought-provoking movie. It takes its ideas very seriously in a way that I think is great. It's one of the best films of the 2010s. And given how Ava's reactions are at the end, I find that way more thought-provoking than I do here, because this film is mostly just having pulpy fun.
It is, and I like that about it.
Does it transcend that a little bit at the end? Maybe, but I don't think it's something you're going to walk away on the drive home going, well, let's have a conversation about that. Like it's
not, but it's at least recognizing that maybe there is a little bit of something there. So that way it's not like we're calling this movie empty calories. It's not empty. It may be trite, and it knows that it's trite, so it's not necessarily a criticism, but there's at least a little bit there under the hood that might be peeking its way out, that can at least provoke a slight dialogue. And I do think it is at least interesting how, both Iris here and you mentioned Patrick, played by Lucas Gage, they have their own respective, human companions that they've been programmed to love, right? Each of their respective counterparts reciprocates that love in very different ways, which I also thought was pretty interesting. Because obviously, as we alluded to in the case of Iris, Josh, played by Jack Quaid, is clearly a manipulator. He's a weak man and utilizes Iris for his own his own greedy gains, we'll simply say. Whereas with regard to Patrick and his partner Eli, their connection's actually genuine on both ends. It's not just one end receiving it and one end giving it. It's there's a genuine romance between the two of them that in order for that dichotomy to work, you kind of have to believe it. And I did mostly believe it because I think the performances are strong in emulating that. Lucas Gage is great, as well as Harvey Gillian, I believe his name is, who plays Eli. Also very compelling. I think their connection, he's fun. I think it works. And I think it creates for an interesting dichotomy in how humans can, I guess, participate in this type of relationship in different ways.
No, I completely agree. And I love how the film not only gives credence to those relationships, but the weird twists and turns that happen. And sometimes it's on a dime. And I think that's like the film. Yeah. Like there's a couple scenes where it gets borderline goofy. And I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way, but
no, that's a compliment.
It's a compliment. Like there's one scene where Iris is on the run. This is after she's escaped and she's in the forest, and she's hiding from Eli and Patrick, who are trying to hunt her down, but they're not in the fight all that seriously, and they're having a conversation about their own relationship that Iris is hearing from a distance as she's hiding behind this tree. And they have like a full-on love affair in this forest, right? Like they're having like a genuine conversation about their relationship and how deeply fallen in love that they are with each other, even though it's a little bit weird because he's not human, he's a robot, but that love is real and genuine. Like it's this sincere moment that's almost out of a rom-com, not a, you know, pulpy sci-fi movie like this. And then in the very next moment, they hear Iris and they're on the hunt again, trying to chase her down. And it turns back into a thriller all of a sudden with that whole sequence crystallizing with Patrick getting murdered by Iris. It is crazy, a crazy series of events. But that is the fun of the film, is that it's somehow able to have these really silly moments that completely change the tone of the film on a dime, and yet like it somehow works. At least from a fun pulpy standpoint, I think I at least had a lot of fun with that.
Good tonal balance from Drew Hancock as a director. I do agree with you on that, because there are sequences here that are genuinely thrilling, like we talked about, but there are also sequences here that are really, really funny. That moment you talked about there, I think, is quite funny, especially given the genre mixing happening there, right? But there are two other sequences that really made me laugh pretty hard. There's one when Iris is on the run and she has Josh's cell phone, so she's able to realize that she can up her own intelligence on his phone, and then starts playing out different scenarios of how she's going to escape. And the editing there is actually pretty clever, and how those different scenarios could eventually work. I thought that was really clever and funny. She also has an encounter with a police officer, which is going to go down as one of the funniest things I think I've seen.
That was a good moment too.
I mean, obviously we're early on in the year. I can't make the hyperbolic statement that it's going to be one of the funniest things I've seen in a movie all year. But it's probably the funniest thing I've seen in a movie so far this year. Like the utilization of German language and how she can't lie, so the subtitles are. He's revealing everything to this police officer, and he doesn't understand a word of it, is really clever and really
That's
funny.
Great irony. No, I love that moment great as well. And that's where, again, the world building of this film, I do think is pretty clever and well executed. I do agree, because that's one thing they know early on, is that these robots cannot lie. That's built into their programming. And so when Josh or Eli, depending on the situation, when they're hearing Iris or Patrick talk, and even like, it's one of those things that you noticed early on when Iris first murders Sergei, and she walks in and she's covered in blood and she's trying to reveal what happened. Josh has no the only thing he can do there is believe her, because she can't tell a lie. So the urgency in her voice, and then it's obviously undercut and revealed moments later that was all part of the plan. But in that moment, there's some great utilization of the world building that was established. But that moment you're talking about, the police officer, is the best one, because
it's so good.
Because she is basically confessing to this police officer exactly what is going on and what she did, but he doesn't, of course, have any clue what she's saying. It's really good. I love that. It's
great. I thought that was great as well.
The reveal of where the cameras are, I thought was a fun little trick as well, given what how this film is. I thought was a fun little twist. Because that whole moment there at the dinner table has some great tension, and it ends in what we think is going to be the end of it for Iris. And so like that, again, like in terms of world building and how these robots function, and it's great. Earlier you were talking about Jack Quaid and his performance and how good he is at giving like this kind of faux menacing performance. Like to see him kind of quiver in that moment, I thought he was really, really good there.
Yeah, there was something weirdly like almost, I don't want to say therapeutic, but just kind of cathartic to see that. Like it just felt good to see him quiver.
Yeah, it's really good. And that's the joy of this film. Again, I had a lot of fun. I don't think it's deep or meaningful in any sort of way, but it's not trying to be. Like I can boil down the entire review to that. Like that's just kind of where I sit. I enjoyed it in the theater. But you know, it's not going to be a film I talk about at the end of the year.
No, I gave this a 3 out of 5 on Letterboxd, but I will admit, had I not known the twists with this movie, if I didn't see any of the marketing beforehand, I probably would have upped this to a 3.5. I would have had more fun with it. I still don't think I would have found it any less diverting or simple-minded as it still is, but I certainly would have enjoyed it in the moment. And there were clearly people in my theater who maybe didn't see any of the marketing. And some people who were going to see it, who are sitting near me, who are actually by themselves, like me, going to see your movie by yourself. I love that. Good for you. They were vocally interjecting during the movie and taken by surprise with a lot of these things that the marketing had already given us. So it was at least kind of neat to see some people having that experience. And I selfishly wish I had that experience as well. But at least that shows that the movie was working for a lot of people in the ways that it was intended.
Yeah, I mean, I have not ranked this on Letterboxd yet, but even if I had not seen the trailer beforehand, obviously we'll never know because I did. But
yeah,
I
can't have that experience.
I would venture to say that I'd probably sit around that 3 out of 5 anyway, like regardless of expectations, because once we get past that early major reveal, what the marketing gives away is a lot less irrelevant. It's a lot of the build up to that major reveal where the marketing is most at play. And again, for all the reasons we talked about earlier, I do think there's a lot of fun to be had. But at the same time, I don't think that like some of the kills I think is a little rudimentary.
Yeah.
There's a couple of moments where I felt like the film was perhaps like it found itself in an imbalance as far as its genre tropes and thrills, you know, and what it was maybe wanting to say with its thematic underbelly. Like I noted earlier, I do think some of the third act gets a little, like it turns up the heat a little bit on that stuff in ways that I don't think is wholly necessary.
Sure.
Mostly this is a frivolous film that just wants to up the ante in terms of its fun factor.
Sure.
And when it does that, when it leans into that, it's really great. When it takes itself seriously, and for the most part it doesn't, but when it does, that's when I think it kind of fizzles out a little bit for me. So like I think I would sit around that 3 out of 5 regardless.
Yeah. I will say there was a huge golden opportunity for this movie. This movie came out this past weekend, so I think its official release date would have been we're recording this on February 3rd, so its official release date would have been like January 30th or something like that. This should have come out on Valentine's Day. Perfect Valentine's Day movie.
Yeah, it could be. And I'm not even sure what comes out on. Is that Captain America? Maybe that's why.
Maybe that's what it is.
I think that's why.
And of course, then we have movies next weekend like Love Hurts and Heart Eyes that kind of play with the whole like Valentine's Day theme in very twisted ways. Yeah,
very much so. Yeah, Valentine's Day is Captain America, Brave New World, and Paddington in Peru. Not sure you want to compete with those two movies. I can see why it came out.
None of them are Valentine's Day like. I mean, imagine
I don't know why they chose Valentine's Day.
Imagine going to the movies on Valentine's Day for a triple feature of Companion, Love Hurts, and Heart Eyes.
Yeah,
that'd be crazy.
And maybe that's what people should end up doing because who knows with the MCU.
Yeah.
And where they're at now. I am trying to be optimistic for Captain America, Brave New World. We shall see.
Me too.
I really love the first two Paddington films. So we'll see on this third one. But yeah, I mean, maybe you can hold out another week or two on those films and you have this little triple feature for
there you go. There you go.
Going date.
Yeah.
This year.
Twisted Horror Love.
Twisted Horror Love. Do you have any final thoughts on Companion?
Sophie Thatcher, that's the review.
Yeah, Sophie Thatcher is really great. And again, just to offer up another criticism, and nothing against the actress, Megan Surrey, I think is fine, but the cat character, completely useless here.
Oh yeah,
offers
absolutely,
absolutely nothing.
absolutely.
to
I
this.
agree. I agree.
Dramatically, thematically, emotionally, just a nothing of a character. At least the other two, like Josh and Patrick, or not Josh, excuse me, Patrick and Eli serve a purpose. And early on, their dynamic is really endearing and fun and great. I love all of that. And then Sergey, Rupert Friend, again, he's only in the film for a brief moment, but he serves a purpose.
He's entertaining. Yeah.
And he's entertaining in his few little moments. I don't know what Kat is doing.
I don't either.
Like, the only reason she is in the film is, to your point earlier, where she's having a conversation with Iris, and there's a lot of foreshadowing. Like, oh, I don't know why I'm telling you my problems. Wink, wink at the audience.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Like,
Iris is like, "Oh, I'm not built that way.
I'm not built.
Oh, really?
That way.
Quite literally, aren't you? Right?"
So like, there's just a lot of like. That's the only reason I think Kat is in the film is to kind of play that I'm dubious of her because I know she's a robot, but she doesn't know kind of
which
thing.
you could have incorporated with other characters, and there's enough foreshadowing outside of their dialogue to cue us in on the fact that Iris is a robot, such as the self-driving car, right? Little things like that cue us into a world that's dominated by AI that might suggest this. Or maybe the most obvious one, and this is something I didn't even pick up on during the movie until someone had to point it out on film Twitter.
I know what you're saying. And
about
yes,
Iris's name, right?
Yeah, I picked that up too. Yeah.
Yeah. You spell it backwards, it says Siri.
Yeah. Good job, Drew Hancock. You played us all for fools.
Yeah. Well, he does a good job masking that because we're led to believe that her name is stemmed from the Goo Goo Dolls song because it was playing. She was delivered to Josh's home.
Yeah, he does hide it. He does hide it.
Yeah, he does a pretty good job hiding that so we don't pick up on it right away.
Yeah. I will say, going back to Kat real fast, I think that character would have been way more compelling if Megan Siri channeled Will Smith from iRobot. That's who should have been in that role. Because, and I will maybe die on this hill, I think that is one of Will Smith's best performances that never gets talked about. He is so funny in that film, and a lot of the comedic backbone of it derives from his prejudice toward robots. Like so this would have been a great opportunity to homage that performance.
Potentially the same character arc right there.
It's the same character arc, in a lot of ways, except, spoiler alert, again, she gets killed.
Yeah.
So, like, literally stabbed in the back. Like,
okay, which was a pretty funny visual gag, I guess. But I saw. I mean, not to say I saw it coming, but there's a line that cues us in. Oh, she's going to die when he tells Patrick, "Stop her." You know that means he's going to take it way too
far.
Right?
Yeah. And get stabbed in the back from good old Patrick. I'm just saying, like, it's a mostly nothing character. And I think maybe the best way to utilize the character or to make it feel like it has a presence here is to really give it like a memorable performance. And I don't think Megan Suri is able to transcend the writing at all. Again, it's nothing against her. It's mostly the writing. But I think if that character is going to be transcend the writing, you really do need like a Will Smith, iRobot type of performance here. Like,
imagine if you got Will Smith for this movie for that reason.
For that role, like, just bring him back, just completely repurpose the character.
Yeah.
I would have loved it. It would have made no sense given the age gap, but I would have went with it.
Oh,
it would have made sense in the long run.
Yeah.
At any rate, iRobot, another one of those really fun movies that I enjoy.
Yeah, pretty good movie.
All right, so that is Companion. Look, as I noted, not going to end up in my top 10 at the end of the year, but
no,
I did enjoy it. I would urge people to go and check it out. Even if you don't want to go see it in theaters, if you have a Saturday afternoon available and you want to have some friends over and have a fun little time, this
is a great living room matinee movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If it ends up on Netflix, wouldn't be like, it feels like a Netflix-y kind of movie at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I guess it's Warner Brothers, so it'd end up on Max, but
Even so, I could see it doing
go
well
watch it
there
on
too,
Max.
because they've got a pretty good horror section on there too.
Yeah, they do. All right, so that is Companion. If you agree or disagree with anything we had to say, leave a comment below. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, reach out to us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can actually leave comments on Spotify now. I keep forgetting to notify people of that, but yeah, you can leave a comment straight on Spotify now. We read those as well. You can always email us in sessionfilm@gmail.com. Be sure to subscribe to the show as well. Again, YouTube, subscribe to the channel, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, however you listen, be sure to subscribe as we have lots of fun content this week or throughout the year, rather. Speaking of this week, though, we do not have a second review. There really wasn't a whole lot out this last week to really talk about, unless we dabbled in some more 2024 films. But we kind of felt like that would have been extremely random just to pick a 2024 film that we haven't talked about yet. So, we decided to forgo a 2024 conversation, even if there are a few I would love to get into. And maybe we will at some point. But in lieu of a second review, we actually will have some Patreon VIP bonus content this week. So if you want to stay tuned for that, if you can sign up via Patreon, patreon.com/InSessionFilm. You can also, again, if you're watching us on YouTube, you can become a member of the YouTube channel and you'll get access to all of our VIP content that way, or you can sign up through a subscription on Apple Podcasts. So there are 3 different ways to get access to our VIP bonus content. However you want to subscribe, we really do appreciate that. And we will have some bonus content this week as we're going to be talking about the Nolan casting for his new movie.
Yep.
We have, what else do we have? There's
Scream 7 casting. Some more casting
news.
announcements. Yeah.
Yep. And we have a couple of teasers. Maybe we could talk about the trailer
teasers for the teasers.
Yeah, the teasers for the teasers.
Which we'll have more to talk about when those trailers actually come out this week, and I'm sure we'll see more of them when it comes to Super Bowl movie trailer time. There'll be a roundtable that I'm sure we'll get to next week. But there's a few we can at least start the conversation on. Yeah,
before we get to what is inevitably going to be Oscars Part 3.
Don't say, please don't say that. There's already more stuff coming out.
Hopefully not. But yeah, we'll probably have some sort of Super Bowl roundup, given that we're going to get a lot of film content this week. So, at any rate, so we're going to have some bonus content. Be sure to sign up, become an In Session Film VIP, and get access to that content exclusively there.
Yeah.
Okay, with all of that laid out, thanks for watching, everybody. Oh, and I guess I just want to know, episode 622 is up. Speaking of the Oscars.
Speaking of controversy.
Speaking of controversy, we did bring back Ryan McQuaid. We had a little bit of a part 2, given all of the Amelia Perez controversy from last week. We had much more to say about that. So go check that out. And Chasing the Gold is going to get even further into it this week as well. So you can be on the lookout for Chasing the Gold. All right. With that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast.